back in the day. Now, I have to believe my sister on this one because I wasn't actually there. But my sister told me the story one time with my grandmother. Now, we used to just pick up and go and stay at my grandmother's place. It was open door policy. It's pretty awesome. And Martha happened to be spending some time in St. Andrews with my grandparents. And my grandmother was all excited, came out to talk to Martha. And she said, "Martha, I have a doctor in St. Andrews, and I have a doctor in St. Stephen, and I have a doctor in St. John, and I have a doctor in Fredericton." So my grandmother has 4 doctors, and depending on where she is or what she's dealing with, she'll go to, a different doctor. So she goes to all these doctors, and although she's talking to them and they're talking to her, they're not talking to each other. So my grandmother has getting medication, and she's diabetic, and she has some other issues, so she's getting medicated and medicated and medicated. There are times when I remember her being very nervous about possibly missing one of her insulin shots. So, anyways, on to the story. My grandmother comes out to Martha and says, "Martha, I've got 4 doctors. They keep giving me medications. And this a couple days ago, I looked at all my medications and realized I don't know what I'm taking half of them for. And so I decided if I don't know what I'm taking them for, I'm not taking them anymore." So she stopped taking medications. About half. She stopped from what I heard. So, anyways, her head cleared up. She didn't even realize she had been in a fog until she stopped taking all these medications. So she went to her doctor, and I'm not sure which one. I guess it doesn't matter. And said, "Doc, I stopped taking half my medications, and I feel great." The doctor says, "What were you taking them for?" She goes, "I don't know." He goes, "Well, stop taking them." And she said, "Martha, I realized I've been stoned for 2 years." Your grandmother say she's been stoned for 2 years. Anyways, but life is like that sometimes. We start taking things, and we start taking things in slowly, and we're listening to this voice over here, and then we're listening to this voice over here, and we're listening to that voice over there. And they're all telling us to do things, and they all sound pretty good. But after a while, we start realizing that we're not feeling all that great. Spiritually sometimes, emotionally, financially. And we realize we've been taking all of this advice, and some of it isn't good for us. It may have sounded good at the time. It might even come from a good source, or maybe it was good for the time, but it isn't anymore. And yet we continue and continue and continue. See, what my grandmother did was very wise. She took account of her life, and she stopped and thought, is this necessary for me? But we don't do that very often. We don't stop and take account of, is this really good for me right now? Is this behavior? Is this thought process? Is this attitude really healthy? Because a lot of times we're justified in a message that we heard from somebody long ago in a context that made sense. But after a while, it just doesn't anymore. So it's important for us to step back and take account of our lives and ask God, am I still living in obedience to you? Is this thing that I've latched onto, this idea or this philosophy or this belief, was that something that was in a context that made sense, and now I'm applying it to something that doesn't? Is this behavior that I'm doing, was that for a context, and now as the context has changed, my behaviors need to change? Is this attitude? Is this investment? Because God wants everything that we do to be effective for the time that we're in. I say this a lot of times, that God has determined the times and the bounds of our habitation that we might seek the Lord. I mean, that's an ongoing thing. God, where are you in this place that you weren't somewhere else? How are you in this situation in my life that you couldn't have been in any other situation? So what do I need to learn from you, and how do I need to grow, and how do I need to develop, and how to become more of who you've intended me to be? Stop taking the drugs you don't need. God bless you. We'll talk to you tomorrow.